It's a real honor to be here today. Thank you for having me here. So in my doctoral research, I've studied how Catalans in northeast Spain use food as a means of expressing national identity in the context of the 21st century independence movement. And in this paper, my interpretation of civilization in the 19th to the 21st centuries will be related to modernity. And what is crucial to understand is that a key element in the image of Catalan nationalism is that of being a modern nation, to be forward-looking, industrious, cosmopolitan, and hard-working. And this was a founding, self-identified feature of Catalan nationalism since its inception in the 1830s. And that was because of the important role in this movement of the self-made, industrialist bourgeoisie who had built up Catalonia's manufacturing and textile industries. So Catalonia was the first part of Spain to industrialize and did so without the help of the centre. And it's also important to realize that in its early decades, there was no emphasis on building a separate state as in today. It was more about being a recognized political unit within the structure of the Spanish state. And Catalans, so would be instrumental in modernizing the rest of Spain. Put another way, Catalans would civilize the backward, rural, agricultural, Castilian Spanish hinterlands to be fit for the modern era. Now, unfortunately, this well-meaning attitude received rather short shrift in Madrid, and Catalans continued to be marginalized. By the 1890s, it was obvious that a new strategy was necessary, and it is from this era that concepts of a separate state really get going. And another reason for this image as a modernizing nation is also geography. So Catalonia is situated directly south of the Pyrenees, so it's got very good links with France, and it also had excellent access to the Mediterranean through its eastern coastal areas. So another part of Catalan's self-image is the land of migrations, where many civilizations have passed through and left their mark. In the 19th century, this location ensured that Catalonia was often the first place to have access to new developments in Europe, and that they would spread to the rest of Spain through Catalonia. So coming from that base, what does Catalan food tell us? One of the conclusions from my research is that food is often used to represent ideals of nationalism, and the Catalan case is no exception. Its historical reputation during the Catalan-Aragonese Empire of the 12th to the 14th centuries, the historic Golden Age, is a point of pride for many Catalans. And it also demonstrates that there was already a concept of Catalan cuisine at this time. The recognized presence of the cuisine by contemporary chroniclers and also the existence of Catalan or Valencian cookbooks from that era is seen as an example of the high level of development of Catalan cuisine and culture at that time. The 13th century Balearic philosopher Ramon Llull also wrote a treatise on how Catalans are ate more graciously and in a better manner than other nations, thus making Catalans better Christians and also more civilized. Some of the 13 reasons he specified include that Catalans only eat as much as they are able and not to excess. They eat nutritiously and quietly, twice a day at set times, and they cut up their meat before they eat it. This is contrasted to other nations like the French, the Germans, the Castilians, and the English, who eat and drink to excess, especially too much meat or beer. They don't have specific meal times, they tear their meat with their hands, etc. So Catalans could therefore claim recognition as being more civilized than other peoples. And another point that Llull recognizes is that Catalans sit at a table, unlike, in his own words, the Castilians, who sit on the floor. And this is quite interesting because Catalans today still define their style of eating as different from others in Spain because they eat at a table, not at a bar. And this is especially discussed, I found, in the context of talking about tapas, which is associated with being eaten at either sitting or standing in a bar setting. Catalans, contrary to the image we'll get in Barcelona, do not see tapas as their own style of food. for instance, with one group that I knew, they compared tapas to a local Sicilian pizzeria or a French creperie when they were considering the choice of foods for a night out. However, the Catalan-style tapas has included many Catalan dishes and foods that are served to be shared at a table, so thus integrating this style of food into Catalan norms. On other occasions, when comparing Catalan food to others, my informants would describe its richness, its complexity, the way there are many different variations within Catalonia itself, and how the cuisine can vary even from village to village. The unusual combinations of seafood and land meats, or of sweet and savoury combinations, also attested to this complexity in the eyes of my informants. By extension, the cuisine was presented as developed and sophisticated. Discussions of other Iberian cuisines revealed more general attitudes to those cultures overall. For instance, the cuisine of the Basque Country, another of Spain's vocal regional nationalisms, was seen with some respect. Andalusian-style cuisine was also tolerated, particularly gazpacho. However, it was seen as a foreign cuisine. And it's also quite interesting that Catalans will often divide up Spain by its different regions and different cuisines. They won't see it as a total cuisine. However, much scorn was reserved for central Spanish cuisine, particularly the cuisine of Castile, which symbolizes all of the negative attitudes about Spain in the Catalan imagination. And it was often described as poor, boring, unvaried, and heavy. In the words of one very well-known chef in Catalonia, if we look at Opengüe, if we look at Castile's cuisine, it's a much more limited cuisine. They have a shorter receptari, that's a list of recipes. Ours is much longer and more varied, close quote. And this was typical of descriptions of Castilian cuisine that I heard, that it was strongly meat-based, there weren't many vegetables, and that the landscape was unvaried. So generally this very negative view. And the same informant later made the same claims about other cultures. And I think it's quite amazing the parallels with Ramon Llull's comments about Catalans several hundred years ago. Another chef I knew claimed that you could go for days in Castile without finding a salad. I don't know how true that is, but you get this, the impression of this sense of othering, both through the food and the landscape that produces that food, and the decivilizing of that other. I'd like to discuss now how civilization as modernity appears and is discussed in Catalan cookbooks. I agree with Arjun Appadurai that cookbooks tell unusual tales in complex civilizations. I believe that in culinary nationalisms, cookbooks can provide an excellent insight into the values and ideas within these movements. The earliest cooking-related publication in the 19th century was La Cuinera Catalana, published as pamphlets from 1833 to 1835. And this is around about the same time that the literary movement that eventually became the nationalist movement actually started. I don't have time to go into the significance of that, but these texts were bound into a book in 1851. And for our purposes, the non-textual elements are the most interesting. So alongside the title page of each of the book's 3 sections is this image of a maid, La Criada, in a typical Catalan kitchen of the era. It's a really interesting kind of culinary history to see what it actually looks like. And next to her is her employer, you can see on the right, the mestressa, the lady of the house. They're both pointing to the book. The mistress seems to be encouraging her cook to use it, and she may even be reading from the book if the cook is illiterate. At the bottom is a transcript of a supposed conversation between the mestressa and the criada. In the first place, the mestressa is telling the cook that this book will show how they can make economies. For instance, to prevent the use of too much oil in frying a hen, and how to cook all types of meats. The criada is unimpressed. "Ah, mistress," she says, "I've had enough. No one writes about tastes." However, by the time we get to the final plate for the sweet foods, her attitude has changed. That's the last one on the right. She says, "I will dedicate myself with pleasure. Like a Cicero will I learn." The servant has also changed from being a criada into a coinera. She's described as that on the second line. So she has moved up in status and expertise. And this book provides a number of strands to discuss issues of modernity, nationalism, literacy, and class. And it demonstrates the upstairs-downstairs relationship between servants and mistress and its tensions. Eventually, the criada comes round to the idea of the cookbook and improves herself through education and learning how to cook well. She might even learn to read through this book. However, there might also be a paternalistic current running through these images. It is her mistress who asserts her power in the kitchen by leading this development, controlling not just what is cooked, but how it is cooked, and also ensuring that the servant is positioned within her part of the social structure. Any potential insubordination has been converted into beneficial knowledge that helps the modernizing, economizing household. The maidservant has been civilized, you could say, or educated into a proper cooking style and social hierarchy. Later cookbooks talk directly about issues of civilization and also make explicit connections between food and nationalism. I've already talked briefly about the importance of a historic golden age in Catalan nationalism in the form of the Catalan-Aragonese Empire, but a connection to ancient Mediterranean civilizations also makes an appearance in nationalist ideology. An example is in the 1907 work La Cuina Catalana, where the author describes the act of cooking as the greatest transcendence, both for the individual and the community. After talking briefly about Catalan foods and the great richness and variety of Catalan food, see that, it appears again, they then set forward their main argument that strong peoples are well-fed peoples. Unlike the Romans, one should not fall into gastronomic excess and eat only for pleasure. We had that discussion yesterday. The ancient Greeks are idealized in this respect. People should eat to live, not live to eat. And he sums up his logic for good food, leading to a healthy nation, as follows, and this is a direct quote in my translation. Good cooks make good food. Good food is eaten with pleasure. Food eaten with pleasure is digested better. Better digested food leads to the conservation of the individual in good health. The conservation of the individual in good health means their bodily functions are regular. Regular functions make strong races. Strong races go forth beyond others and eventually make themselves masters of the world. So, as we've already seen in this conference, good food gives a group their best chance at world domination. Good cooks, a culture of gastronomy, and regular bowel movements are essential for building a strong civilization. So the writers certainly connecting their work to the grander scheme of constructing a Catalan nation from its stomach. And the next most interesting work from this perspective is the 1923 Art of Good Eating by Marta Salvia, who again makes the case of Catalan cuisine being a distinctive national cuisine, and she links the cuisine with those of ancient Mediterranean civilizations, such as that described in the Homeric epics, thus implying continuity across civilizations. Finally, there is another way that Catalan cuisine has kept up this modernizing, developing, and one could say civilizing image. In the 1990s, Catalan chef Ferran Adrià, the head chef at the restaurant of El Bulli on the Costa Brava, developed a new style of cooking, inspired by both Catalan cuisine and the French Nouvelle Cuisine movement. He created the style, popularly known as molecular gastronomy, although it's got lots of different names. He actually doesn't like the name molecular gastronomy. And it's based on the idea of deconstructing a food to its constituent parts and then reformulating it. Adrià led the vanguard in this movement, making Catalonia the place where the new developments in food were happening. His successors, such as Carme Ruscalleda and the Roca brothers, have continued to develop this movement, and it has now spread to others in the rest of Spain and across the world, as in Blumenthal, for instance. Now, many of the innovations first pioneered in El Bulli are de rigueur in a modern restaurant setting. The tradition of innovation in Catalan cuisine fits perfectly into ideas of national character and other symbols of identity, and is promoted as such by the Catalan government. even if Catalans couldn't civilize or modernize the rest of Spain through industrialization, perhaps, I suggest, its chefs have succeeded by bringing new ideas about gastronomy to the rest of the country and the world. Perhaps that's a type of world domination today. Thank you. Okay, I think Atsuko and
Thank you very much. Thanks for this. Obviously, this is something I'm very much interested in. And but kind of trying to put this paper within the context of this session. I'm just wondering if you could say a bit more about the contrast or relationship between the idea of civilization and modernity, as you see in your piece of work. We had 3 papers on civilization. How being civilized it's related to certain types of food or cooking, etc. Raw cook, etc. In antiquity. In Catalan case, they are kind of claim to authenticity or superiority made it's kind of partially connected to antiquity through their relationship to kind of Greek, Roman civilization. But at the same time, they are making a claim to be modern. But obviously, Romans and Greeks cannot be modern.
Yeah, I mean, there is there's a very popular phrase that a lot of these kinds of chefs used to describe their approach, which was a tradition of modernity. So it's kind of a contradiction in terms. So like, you have this tradition of being modernizers. You have this tradition of moving forward. So I think that's how they try and interpret it. And I mean, yeah, some of my Catalan informants said, it's really weird. We're kind of schizophrenic in that sense that history is really important for us, but also we like to be forward-looking. But I think also, the people without history are the ones who are destined to repeat it. So there's also that idea that if you want to move forward, you need to understand your history as well. So I think you are going to ask the next question? Or? Okay.
The wonderful thing about authenticity is that when it doesn't exist, it can be invented. When the Michelin Guide started out first as a guide to where you could get your car repaired, and then where you could eat, and the demand came for authentic local recipes. The authentic local recipes all over France were, the peasant dishes were things that the bourgeoisie did not want to, were not interested in eating. And there's this well-documented history of the way in which local authentic dishes were actually invented out of whole cloth, as it were, and presented as this is the real thing. Come here and get it.
Yeah. That also is very much. I mean, there's debate about how much that really happened in Catalonia, like Catalan national food, with pan tomàquet, which is sort of basically bread rubbed with tomato, and that's sort of recognized as very symbolic for Catalans. I mean, that only came from the 19th century, and that's something that's quite ironic, especially considering that Catalans will often say, well, you have this cuisine stretching back to the medieval era, a lot of our dishes come from that. But it's interesting you mentioned that, because there was the town where I was living, actually, Vic, which has a very strong identity, but it doesn't really have a proper dish associated with it. It has certain products, but not a dish. And so a group of restaurants got together and had this competition to try and actually create a dish with the best products. And it was a disaster. It really was. The food they eventually found was something that it tasted awful. No one actually wanted it. It didn't have that association with the region, and within about a year it was off the menus. Because it was so obvious that it was inauthentic and fake that it failed. So I think, it's an interesting point. Yes?
Yeah, tying it all together, Nouvelle Cuisine, or Cuisine Nouvelle, was actually created by the Swiss chef, Anton Mosiman. And it was actually created because his wife told him to lose weight. So you're linking everything in the history here with the modernity because it's all about weight.
That's interesting. Yes.
The underlying historical theme, presumably, for Catalonia, is an historical experience of oppression. Under Franco, you couldn't speak Catalan. There are many other, sort of before that even, that being Catalan was something that had to be wiped out, excluded.
1714 especially.
So to what extent, therefore, has food as an everyday, you have to actually put something in your mouth after all every day, become, and became the vehicle by which being Catalan, was both still experienced, but also could be surreptitiously, elaborated and conveyed as a way of being able to say you're Catalan when ostensibly in all and quite violently that would be oppressed.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. It really came to the forefront under the Franco period, and cookbooks actually were quite important in this. Especially under Primo de Rivera's dictatorship as well, earlier in the 20th century, you could publish Catalan cookbooks because they were seen as something unthreatening. And also...
Publish them in Catalan?
Yeah, you could publish them in Catalan. And say in the Franco period, there was one person I knew who grew up during that era, and there was still censor of... you couldn't really publish many things in Catalan, only religious texts, or publications of things that were like 100 years old. But in his household, they had, in his mother's kitchen, they had Catalan cookbooks, and that was one of the few examples of Catalan that was allowed and that he could read regularly. So in some sense, cookbooks are really a part of that, also cooking Catalan cuisine. Also, I found there were 2 cookbooks that were published, they were just tiny little cookbooks that were published under the Franco period, just towards the end. And there they state that Catalan cuisine is a separate cuisine and it's different from others. Now, if you'd have put those ideas into any other context, that wouldn't have been published. So I think cooking was kind of an interesting way of expressing those ideas.
Yes, and I wonder whether your story about the senor and the servant wasn't also actually an allegory about relationships with Castile.
I'm not sure about that so much. I think because they're both speaking in Catalan, you see.
No, of course they do speak Catalan, but you can say within speaking Catalan, you can really say something about your oppressor.
Perhaps that might be the case.
What are the borders of Catalonia in culinary terms, and how does it go into Valencia province? How does it go into the Balearic Islands?
Okay.
People speak Catalan or something resembling Catalan. Are they accepted as Catalan in their food?
That's an interesting point, and in a way deserves a whole new presentation. But I mean, like this area, kind of La Franja of Aragon, just like on the west, and also right in the south, in the delta of the Ebro Delta, that has quite an interesting relationship with the whole Catalan identity situation. I actually spent a bit of time there because the climate is very different. It's much warmer. There's a greater sense of being maybe Spanish and Catalan, or more Spanish than Catalan. There's also much more of a connection with Valencia. There are more kind of rice dishes, for instance. You can't have... Catalonia is famous for its cured sausages, and that's because of the climate. Whereas in the Ebro Delta, it's too hot to actually produce those cured sausages, so you can't have that. Also in the Balearic Isles, you mentioned, there is some relationship there in terms of aioli, and mahonesa, which comes from there. Catalans sometimes take recipes from there, but they might say, oh, this is directly from the Balearic Isles, you know, so it's a means of expressing that this is also part of Catalonia, this is part of the Països Catalans, which is an image of the greater Catalan nation, which also includes part of France. So in response to your question, yes, overall, in, say, the Catalan heartland, using some of those recipes is a way of expressing kind of greater Catalan identity. So.
As new and exciting and expensive variations proliferate, I have a favorite quotation of Jane Grigson that keeps coming to mind. We have more than enough masterpieces. What we need is a better standard of ordinariness.
Yeah. Yes?
The pitfalls of, I think, you know, the cookbooks and things like that, and having been to Spain, and it works for Spain, but you have to be very careful with cookbooks, as Uzbekistan. Okay, Uzbekistan has, just in the last 20 years, a plethora of Uzbek cookbooks in Uzbek. And they're mostly criticized by saying, hey, this is just warmed over Tajik food. and the joke here is that Uzbek is an artificial language. Stalin wanted to split off, Kazakhstan was too big, and he wanted to split off some of the dialect groups. So there were vowel harmony Uzbeks, Kazakhs, and non-vowel harmony Uzbeks. And Radio Tashkent was established based on the non-vowel harmony Uzbeks. And so the Uzbek language is essentially something that was broadcast by Radio Tashkent, and it is was recognized by Stalin as being Uzbek, the language of Uzbekistan. And then, boom, we have all these Uzbek cookbooks and self-identity. Now that Karimov has bit the dust, I'm not sure what's going to happen. But I personally love to do what you do, which is to use cookbooks as a symbol of nationalism. But they're crazy examples like this Uzbek.
Yeah, I mean, I quite agree. Like, I mean, it's not just the content, it's the context that can sometimes be more important.
I think it works for Catalonia, but it doesn't work for Uzbekistan.
I think with this invention of tradition, perhaps we might call it, it's a very appropriate point to finish this session, which I've enjoyed immensely, and I hope everybody else has